You're watching a martial arts film from 1975. The hero leaps through the air, nunchucks spinning. The camera zooms in on his face. You squint, something's off. The jawline is close. The intensity is there. But this isn't Bruce Lee. This is Bruce La, and he is one of at least a dozen men who changed their names to sound like a dead movie star. When Bruce Lee died in July 1973, he left behind four completed films and a global audience that wasn't ready to say goodbye. The funeral wasn't even over before producers in Hong Kong and Taiwan started making phone calls. They had sets built, stuntmen on payroll, and distribution deals that required Bruce Lee movies. There was just one problem: Bruce Lee was gone, so they did what the film industry does best when demand outpaces reality. They manufactured supply. This is the story of how one man's death created an entire shadow industry of imitators, and how the economics of exploitation cinema turned grief into profit. Bruce Lee's global breakthrough came just months before his death. Enter the Dragon premiered in August 1973, 5 weeks after he collapsed in a Hong Kong apartment. The film made over $200 million worldwide. Audiences in Detroit, Lagos, Bangkok, and Mexico City lined up around the block. Distributors who had initially dismissed martial arts films as niche products suddenly scrambled to acquire anything that looked remotely similar. But there was a finite amount of Bruce Lee footage. Two earlier films, The Big Boss and Fist of Fury, were re-released. Older projects he'd worked on got repackaged. Even unfinished material and screen tests were cobbled together into something marketable. Within a year, the archives ran dry. The demand did not enter the Bruceploitation era. This wasn't a conspiracy or a single organized scheme. It was a distributed network of independent producers who all recognized the same market opportunity. If audiences wanted Bruce Lee and Bruce Lee was unavailable, the next best thing was someone who looked like Bruce Lee, moved like Bruce Lee, and had a name that sounded close enough to Bruce Lee that a theater marquee in Buenos Aires or Rome might not immediately reveal the substitution. Bruce Lee was born Huang Kin Lung in 1950. He studied martial arts, worked as a stuntman, and bore a passing resemblance to the real Bruce Lee. A producer approached him in 1974. The pitch was simple: change your name, copy the mannerisms, wear the yellow tracksuit, we'll handle the marketing. Bruce Lee's first film was released within months. It made money, so they made another, and another. He wasn't alone. There was Bruce Lee, real name Cho Chung Tao, who starred in Exit the Dragon, Enter the Tiger, and at least 15 other Bruceploitation films. There was Bruce Tai, Bruce Lai, Bruce Lung, Dragon Lee, who didn't even bother with the full name substitution. And then the truly absurd entries: Myron Bruce Lee, Lee Bruce, Bruce Lai, Bruce K.L. Lee. Some of these men were legitimate martial artists. Others were actors with minimal training who relied on editing and doubles. A few were both skilled and shameless. The films themselves followed a predictable template: low budgets, rapid shooting schedules, plots that often involved revenge, tournament fights, or historical settings that required little in the way of expensive sets. Many included actual Bruce Lee footage spliced into the narrative. Sometimes this was archival material. Other times it was a cardboard cutout or a stand-in filmed from behind. One movie literally used a motorcycle helmet to hide the fact that the actor on screen was not the actor on the poster. The Dragon Lives Again featured Bruce Lee fighting in the afterlife against Dracula, Cleopatra, The Godfather, and Zatoichi. Yes, that's Zatoichi, the blind swordsman from Japanese cinema. The film cost almost nothing to make and played in grindhouse theaters across 3 continents. It was incoherent. It was tasteless. It was profitable. Here's the uncomfortable math. Bruce Lee's legitimate films were expensive. They had choreographers, proper stunt coordination, and scripts that required multiple rewrites. A Bruceploitation film could be shot in 2 weeks for a fraction of the cost. If it made back 5 times its budget in secondary markets, that was a win. And many of them did exactly that. The profit margin on a fake Bruce Lee movie often exceeded the profit margin on a real one. Distributors loved this. They could flood markets with product. If one Bruce Lee film underperformed, there were 3 more coming next month. Audiences in smaller cities, especially outside Asia, often didn't know they were watching an imitator. The posters were deliberately misleading. The translations obscured details. And once someone bought a ticket, the money was already collected. Bruce Lee's family tried to stop it. Legal challenges were filed. Cease and desist letters went out. But intellectual property law in the 1970s, especially across international borders, was murky at best. Trademark protections didn't cover a person's name in the way they might today. And even when courts ruled in favor of the estate, enforcement was nearly impossible. A producer in Manila or Istanbul wasn't particularly concerned about a ruling from a court in Los Angeles. The phenomenon wasn't unique to Bruce Lee after James Dean died. Studios repackaged his old television work and sold it as new content. Elvis impersonators became a cottage industry, but Bruceploitation had scale. At its peak, there were over 50 films explicitly marketed as Bruce Lee content that featured none of his actual work. That number doesn't include the hundreds of martial arts films that borrowed his aesthetic without copying his name. By 1980, the trend had mostly burned out, audiences caught on, the novelty faded, and a new generation of martial arts stars, Jackie Chan among them, offered something fresh. But Bruce Lee kept working. He appeared in over 30 films across 2 decades. Some of them were Bruceploitation. Others were just low-budget action movies where his resemblance to Bruce Lee was incidental, or at least unspoken. In interviews, Bruce Lee has been remarkably candid. He acknowledges that his career was built on someone else's image. He's also pointed out that he needed work, the offers were real, and the alternative was unemployment. The moral calculus of exploitation cinema isn't simple. The producers were cynical, but the actors were often just trying to survive in an industry that chewed people up whether their names were real or borrowed. There's a broader question embedded in all of this. What do we owe the dead? Bruce Lee's image was used without his consent to sell products he never endorsed and films he never made. His legacy was diluted, commodified, and in some cases outright mocked. But that same wave of imitation also kept martial arts cinema alive during a period when studios were uncertain about its viability. Some of the stuntmen and choreographers who worked on Bruceploitation films went on to do legitimate, acclaimed work. The genre didn't die, it mutated. Bruce Lee is still alive. He's in his 70s now. He gives occasional interviews, appears at martial arts conventions, and seems unbothered by the strangeness of his filmography. He was part of a machine, and the machine moved on. The films remain, scattered across YouTube and bargain bin DVD collections, a testament to what happens when the market wants something so badly it is willing to accept a copy of a copy. The uncomfortable truth is this: the audience knew, maybe not at first, but eventually, and they kept buying tickets anyway.